So, Rex, thank you so much for being here. I greatly appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Yeah, I've had a lot of actors ask me about headshots. And I know for me as an actor, when I used to be acting headshots, I dreaded the headshot process. I didn't know how to research a headshot photographer. When I got there, there was no way I was recreating what was happening in that headshot session. And it seemed like every time I would, go to a casting director workshop, or I would go to an audition. Oh, you look so much different than your headshot, and it was so deflating. So I think there's a lot of actors that feel that way. So I'm so happy that you're here. Thank you so much because I feel like you're an expert. You're a headshot photographer in New York City, and I would just love to kind of banter a little bit about some
Yeah,
of these questions that we get.
I,
So
I, headshots are very overwhelming, and I don't think it's something that any actor really looks forward to because there is so much pressure on getting the perfect headshot.
that's a relief.
Yeah.
Honestly, that it really is a relief.
Yeah, yeah.
So maybe you could just give us a little background about you.
Yeah, well, I've been shooting. I've loved photography since I was in high school. I have my degree in it. After college, I moved to South Beach, and my background is in fashion. So I was shooting fashion there in the 90s. I took a job in New York City in the 90s, and I moved here, and I was actually a model manager for 8 years. So I have background in that as well. And my passion has always been developing talent. And I think that that is directing and developing talent is really my strength, and that has parlayed well into working with actors and doing headshots because I understand the other side of management and casting, and I bring that to the table with this.
That's incredibly helpful because I know, at least for me at the studio, and even in casting, I talk a lot about type, right?
Yeah,
Like you have to know your type so that you
absolutely.
know how the industry is going, how the industry views you,
Yeah,
so that you're able to show up to your headshot session and really have an understanding of what you need to walk away with. And
absolutely.
the photographer is there to help you,
Absolutely.
to guide that. So maybe we could talk a little bit about, why don't we start with this? At your studio, could you walk us through what happens at a headshot session?
Absolutely. Well, what we like to do now, and what we came up with a new step in our process over COVID that we really enjoy, and I think it's very helpful for both us and the actor. And that is once we do the initial booking of the date and time and all of that kind of thing, we set up a quick video session to get to know each other before we even start the shoot. And that has been extremely helpful across the board. That way we get to see each other, we talk about character types, we talk about wardrobe, and that way the actor gets comfortable with this team. We know each other. They don't have to bring their entire wardrobe. We get to look through their closet together. We could talk about the character types, which outfits will go with those outfits. And so they come in way more prepared. We know them. We have a list, and we can get to work right away. And it takes a lot of the butterflies away for them. I think that that helps a lot. Then when we get here, we talk about those things again. Sometimes it helps to see clothes in person and get to see them in person. We kind of come up with the outfits we're going to shoot, the characters within those outfits that we kind of have in mind, and we keep it all kind of loose and easy. I don't like to come up with a rigid structure for a shoot because I find that once we get going, if we let it go organically, it's much more successful. We don't want to keep it too rigid. And then we get started. If it's a female identifying actor, they go into hair and makeup. For male identifying actors, usually we do a little powder, we make sure their hair looks good, and then we get started. And we just, like I said, we kind of just like feel it through, and we give both physical directions, how to turn your head, what looks good. We want it to be flattering, of course. Our philosophy is we want you to look like you on your best day, and we don't want to use too many smoke and mirrors and that kind of thing. We want the casting director to have a sense of who's going to walk in the door when you show up for an audition. And then we coach you through character ideas. And again, we keep within the scope of who you are, of who your type is. We don't want to stretch it too far. And we work through those things. We change outfits. We have a lot of fun. We laugh a lot. I like to tease my clients a lot, so they should prepare themselves for that. And then we shoot the entire thing. At the end of the shoot, we take a quick look and review everything to make sure we've covered everything that we discussed, and that's it. And then we send all the files to them. They look at them, they make their decisions on what they're going to have retouched and use. Often they have an agent or an acting class or team or teachers or whoever that they have to help them narrow it down. I think that it's tough for an actor to make final decisions on their own for headshots. We all have our own stuff in our heads about what we see when we look at ourselves. And I think it's very helpful to have people who understand this business and understand characters and personality and headshots specifically to help you choose your headshots and narrow them down to make final decisions.
What are your thoughts on retouching? Since we're talking about, it is important to look like your headshot so
Right,
that us on the casting side, we're not like,
right,
what? I
right,
mean,
right,
I've had actors send me, I've seen actors send us black and whites. I'm like,
right.
I'm pretty sure you took this like 30 years,
Well,
which is fine, but you don't look like that anymore.
I think that the greatest sin in headshots is over retouching. And I think the casting directors would probably agree with me on that, especially right now with all the Instagram filters and the TikTok filters and all of that. I think that especially for young people, that's actually what they kind of think they look like. And it, that's not really reality. I think casting directors would much prefer a raw, unretouched photograph to something that is over retouched. Um, and I work with a lot of managers. I know a lot of casting directors. I talk to them. I know what they're looking for, and they want to see pores. They want to see human skin. They want to know exactly who's walking in the door. So in retouching, I usually, I'll do a little color correct to make sure the skin tone is very natural, that it looks just like them. I clean up little, flyaway hairs here and there. If you had a blemish that day, I'll take care of that kind of stuff. But for the most part, I really pride my retouching in that when you look at it, it looks better, but you can't tell what I did.
What makes a great headshot, in your opinion?
I think a great headshot is, again, it's you on your best day, but it's not just a flattering photograph of you. It's something that really shows your personality. It gives you a sense of who's going to walk through that door. And it gives just a little lean into the type of character that you might be reasonably cast for. It gives you an idea. It gives the casting director an idea of, are you a mom? Could you play a mom? Could you play a doctor? Could you play a blue collar worker, a cop, or could you play all of those things? So that's you want to. And another thing is that you want to keep it somewhat general and somewhat personal to who you are. I always say that you want to spoon feed them. You don't want to shove it down their throats. Like if you're someone that could very easily play a doctor in a procedural, you would wear something nice and professional. You wouldn't wear a lab coat and a stethoscope. As a headshot photographer, I also do shoot a lot of doctors for their websites and stuff. And no doctor has ever shown up with a lab coat and a stethoscope. So you want to keep all of that realistic and professional. So you want to just keep that realistic and again, just lean into it.
I'm so happy you brought that up because I've had a few questions in our Facebook group. We're in the self-tape world, right? I mean, we have been for the past
No.
5 years, but now really, that's the way that we're casting. And casting is doing their best to send specific directions for actors. And a couple of actors had said, well, this casting office said no costumes. It's a television office. What does that mean? This is casting for I don't remember what role it was. So let's just take the doctor example. It's casting for a doctor, but they said no costumes. So
Yeah.
does that mean that I shouldn't have scrubs on, like just a
Right.
scrub shirt on? Like what should I? And I love that you're saying this, like
Yeah.
lightly suggest the role.
Right. Spoon feed. Right.
Right. That's
Very
exactly right.
lightly. And I want to say also that just in my own experience, I have learned over time how powerful color is in headshots in terms of wardrobe. Um, if you're wearing something that is olive green, it is subliminally extremely powerful suggestion of military. If you're wearing something blue, it is extremely powerful suggestion of blue collar and police. So you don't have to wear a costume to give that suggestion of those characters. If they say doctor and your first idea is scrubs, you don't certainly don't wear scrubs. But if you happen to have a shirt or a blouse that is that tinge of green that might suggest, that gives that little bit of faint suggestion of that, that might work. That might be very powerful without forcing it down their throat.
I see that a lot with quirky, right? Quirky
Yeah.
characters.
Yes,
And I think
exactly.
that's, yeah, and I think it's fun to see, somebody that has like a printed shirt on with a solid sweater over it or something
Right.
that's just a little bit more funky and fun.
Right. It's just a suggestion.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about the difference between a commercial headshot and a theatrical headshot or a television and film headshot, a
Right.
dramatic headshot, I should say.
Well, if you think about what a commercial headshot is, you are in fact selling something. It's commercial. You are selling a product, you're selling an experience. So the energy of it, the thought behind it is, oh, I just tried this restaurant. You got to try it too. It's excitement. It's a one friend talking to another about sharing an experience. So that's the energy behind it. And typically that energy is a big smile, like, I'm happy about this. You will be too. And it's not always a big, big smile, but that's usually the way it leans. And that's definitely the feeling of it. That's the way you want to go. And that is often accompanied with a little more color, a little more light. You want to, the feeling of it is light and happy. Legit theatrical is really the biggest difference in it is that big smile, that big energy. Instead of selling a product or an experience, you're really kind of selling yourself. You're selling your personality, you're selling your character. And so it's not this, it could be, in the past it was very serious, like drama. That's not the way it is. You're selling your personality, and most people are not that. It's a little flirt. It's a little whimsy. It's not a big smile, but it's a little bit of who you are. And that's the job of the photographer, to find that and to showcase that in a photograph.
Speaking of that, is it helpful for an actor to put together a Pinterest board of types of roles that they can play to really break down, you know, who they are, how the industry sees them, and then share that with you because photographers, let's face it, are visual. So is that something that you're open to, and if so, how does that help you in your session?
That is more helpful, even more than what you were saying, because you're asking about that in terms of character, and yes, for that. But also, actors will see something in a headshot that they really like, and certainly I'm not going to copy a headshot, nor could I. I mean, I know from experience, I've tried to copy my own work, and it's impossible. Photographs are in that moment, like you can never recreate a photograph really. Even if it's the same person, you can't really ever recreate something. So, but it is very helpful visually for a photographer to see. And when people do show me photographs of things they like, whether it's the character or they like the light or they like the color, it does help me. And I'll ask them, what is it about this? And very often it's something about it that I wouldn't assume that it is. Maybe it's the little smile they have, or maybe it's the background color, or maybe it's the way the light is hitting their hair. I can't make the assumption that because they're showing me a photograph that I know what it is that they're showing me. But it does open up a conversation about what it is they're looking for. And I love that. And it helps, if they show me 3 or 4 photos that they like, I get a real idea of where they're coming from and what they're looking for. And it's extremely helpful to me. And I do explain to them that we're not recreating anything. We're just getting the feel of whatever it is that they like about that.
You talked a little bit about wardrobe.
Mhm.
So when it comes to actors choosing wardrobe, I mean, I love this video meeting that you're doing to actually be able to see actors' closets and
Yeah.
what they would wear. That seems really helpful. What clothing should actors bring for headshots? And is there any clothing that they should avoid?
The definite things to avoid, the number one thing is any kind of text. Our brains, our eyes automatically go to any text because we want to read what it is. And the number one thing we want to focus on in a headshot is the eyes. So avoid any text. After that, any kind of pattern or anything that will draw our attention away from the eyes. I'll throw in with that jewelry. Our philosophy is that the shiniest thing in the photograph should be your eyes. Now, that being said, and I'm kind of getting off here a little bit, but in terms of jewelry, if if you're if it's if you're playing like a DA who would be wearing pearl studs and that works with the look, that's fine if it's not stealing the show. You know, so you can work with a little bit of jewelry if it works for it and it's not too much. So it's not that you can't wear jewelry, just I wouldn't wear medallions or big hoop earrings or, you know, tiaras, you know, that kind of keep it cool. But in terms of clothes, you want to keep it, the highlight should be you and the wardrobe should take a back seat. So you want to keep it very subtle for the most part, keep it solid colors as much as you can. But like you said, you know, with quirky, it does work sometimes to have a fun pattern with something over it. For the most part, we like to use jewel tones, deeper colors, they photograph better. So, but you know, these are all rules of thumb. And sometimes when you break a rule or three rules, it still works. So you sometimes you don't know until you put it all together and see it. Um, for example, if you're doing a professional look and you have a dark blazer, a pastel shirt, a splash of a little pastel will work when normally we say avoid pastels. So these are rules of thumb, but you never know when it's going to work otherwise. One other thing I'll say is that tight stripes or tight checkers and stuff on video on a monitor, sometimes I'm sure most people have experienced this, on a monitor they'll vibrate a little bit, and you don't want that. You don't want to give a casting director a headache from your vibrating clothes. So we avoid those kinds of things as well. And you know, and patterns, we were talking about the quirky thing. Another thing, layers work really well, especially within like one look. If you're paying for packages based on numbers of looks, what we'll do is we'll do layers. We'll do, say, a t-shirt and maybe a flannel and then maybe a jacket on top of that. That's one look, and then we'll peel them off and do a few shots each way. That's all one look. It's one outfit, but you're getting more for your money and you're getting more character out of, you know, we're stretching it and getting more variety out.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that. So, how you talked a little bit about this with filters, but how has technology changed uh, actors' headshots?
Well, that's changed a lot. I mean, even 10 years ago, you pretty much, an actor would pretty much have their commercial shot and their legit shot. And that was pretty much what you had. And even 10 years ago, you'd get those printed. Now, I mean, unless you're doing a lot of workshops and people are still collecting a couple prints, and I'm not even sure that that happens at all anymore now since, you know, the pandemic. I think it's pretty much all digital now. It's always good, I think, to have a couple prints on hand just in case. But the great thing about not printing it, not only does it save you a lot of money, but with the databases like Casting Networks and Actors Access and Backstage, they allow you to have many different aspects, many different characters. So you get to show different aspects. You get to lean into each of those characters. And the thing about all art, and this includes headshots, is it's not so much about what you're looking at, it's about how it makes you feel. It's the feeling it elicits. And that's how breakdowns are designed. You know, when you get a breakdown, it gives you a physical aspect for sure, but it also gives you a little bit of a feeling of this character. And so you get to match the feeling of a breakdown with the feeling of this headshot. And if you have an arsenal of 6 or 7 headshots as opposed to 1 or 2, you get to submit, or your agent, whoever, if you're self-submitting, or your agent gets to match the feeling and the physical aspect of a headshot with that breakdown. And that gives you the edge, that gives you a competitive edge when you're submitting it to a casting director.
I mean, it's so much easier than in the dinosaur days when I was acting because it's exactly what you're saying. Digitally, I mean, you're probably shooting 300 photos, I would think, at a
Right.
session. And so
Right.
the actor has, a basket full of headshots to choose from.
Yes.
And putting them on Actors Access, I think you get two free and then you have to pay $10 or $15 per. But
Right.
the beauty of that is exactly what you're saying. You get to choose. I'm always a big fan of actors submitting themselves,
Yeah.
for roles that they think that they're right for, but you do
Absolutely.
get to choose those headshots that fit that breakdown.
Right.
That's such a great point that I just
And
think
it's
of.
good for everybody. It works for everybody,
Yeah.
including the casting director.
Because before you just used to have that one hard copy because
Yep.
it costs you $300 to get, 100 of
Right,
that
right.
one headshot copy. But now, you do have a plethora to choose from.
And the thing is, because everybody's doing it, it also means that you have to do it to remain competitive.
Mhm.
You can't just have 2 headshots anymore. If you want to be in the game and keep up with everyone else, you've got to do it as well.
Yeah, I always tell actors, it's your business. Like you have
Yeah.
to run your career like it's a business and update and make make your website. You have to make it current and you have to update your reel and your website and your headshot. So,
I would like to actually say something about updating as well. One thing that I learned from being a model manager, and and this is the dinosaur days as well, when we actually had printed comp cards, we would have models that would have international covers on their comp card. But if we didn't update it every 6 months or whatever, the casting people would see that same card every day all the time, and after a while, you don't see it anymore because it's the same thing. So you have to change it up just to catch their attention. And that doesn't mean you have to shoot every 6 months, although I wouldn't be mad if you did. But you need to change up the marketing of it. You need to catch their attention again. Change that headshot every once in a while so they see you again, because you just become invisible after a while.
hmm. Let's talk about this. I know I've heard from actors, "Oh, I didn't really like my headshot, but I didn't want to say anything. The photographer showed me, but I didn't want to like say I didn't like them. Like, now that I have them, do I ask to reshoot?" How do you, what advice would you give to actors if they're in a session and feel that way?
Well, it's really, first of all, it's really important to be honest, because as a photographer, I'm there to make you happy, to give you the most competitive product possible. Um, Especially in the moment. If you look at something and you're not happy with it, now's the time, because we're here. You're in makeup, we have the clothes, we have everything set up. We can correct it, we can fix it, we can tweak it in the moment. It's a lot tougher if you're dishonest with us and then later say something that becomes more complicated. That being said, sometimes we have to remember that a picture that we love of ourselves, and the prettiest, we all want to be pretty. But
Mhm.
sometimes the prettiest picture of us is not the most competitive headshot. We have to remember that just because we don't love a headshot doesn't mean that it's not the best headshot. So we have to reconcile that as well. A lot of times, uh, I work one-on-one with managers. Managers will send their actor to me, and I will speak with the manager. They'll tell me what they want, what will be most competitive, what will work best for this actor. I'll have the video consultation. We'll have that conversation with what the manager said. We'll come up with a plan. We'll nail it. And very often the actor will say, well, this isn't something I would put on my mother's mantle per se, but I know that my manager will be able to get me a lot of work with this. So, it's headshots are complicated things sometimes when it comes to that. And strangely, a lot of actors don't love looking at pictures of themselves. They don't love looking at themselves on video. They love acting, but that doesn't mean that they are vain, that they like looking at themselves so much. So a lot of that, my studio manager will say, try to get your crazy in check before you show up. And I understand this as well. I don't love looking at myself on Zoom right now. So, that's it's part of the way it goes. But in terms of that, just be as honest and, prepare yourself for that. Prepare yourself to look at yourself, and prepare yourself to be very honest, because everything can be fixed in the moment. And whereas if you wait, it may not be able to be.
Thank you for that advice, because
I'd like to add something to
yeah.
that as well. This is another reason that it's very wise, if you work with a photographer that your agent, manager, or your teacher, or if you're recommended a photographer by somebody and you're really unhappy with it, say your agent recommends somebody to you and you're really unhappy with it, you could go to your agent, because they have a relationship with that photographer, and they might be able, if they agree with you that this one just didn't work out, they might be able to work that out with you. That's why it's always good to work with people that your teacher or your agent or your manager work with, because you have a lot more leverage that way to make it work for you.
Great point. Because I'll say to actors, if I'm helping them prep for a headshot session, listen, you can only control as much as you can control. So let's talk about what that is. That's you choosing outfits. That's you knowing your type, first of all. Let's just get that out of the way. Especially if they're new, right? Especially if somebody's new to the industry, you have to know your type so that you can get that. You can do your research of headshot photographers that shoot your type. Right? Like if you're a comedian, you don't want to go to a headshot photographer that mostly deals with dramatic actors. That's not going to give you what you want. So I feel like, it's the actor's responsibility to do their due diligence with wardrobe outfits, with picking up the phone and having a conversation with the headshot photographer to see if you're compatible, if you feel comfortable with that headshot photographer. Right. Having your questions laid out, like, hey, here's the questions that you have. Like maybe you're somebody that has curly hair and you want to know, like, how does that work? Can I bring my own products? Are you open to that? Just having a conversation, I think, is really incredibly important as well. And then, doing a Pinterest board, I think, is great for headshot photographers, because it gives you a visual. You're both on the same page. You can talk through it. And then what you're saying during the session, looking at the headshots, because I know most headshot photographers show you the headshot, and then hopefully feeling empowered because you did your homework and saying, hey, could we try this or a little bit more in this direction like we spoke about? Because then it's not like you're just blindly, I can't tell you how many times I personally have blindly walked into a headshot session and I'm like, oh my gosh, just like what you're saying, I don't look like that. I can't imagine that I look like that. What is that wrinkle? Or I look a little puffy, or why is my face so round? And I start picking myself apart that already feels icky, and then I feel too scared to say anything. So I've walked out before with something that I just don't like, that I don't feel proud to submit. So I think that there
is, and I think you're bringing up a good point. When you are talking, when you're doing your due diligence and talking to photographers, you should ask, do we get to review the photos before I leave? Because if you are able to review them and you do see something you'd like to correct, you have that option. If you leave blindly, sometimes you don't. Right. I'd also like to say, if you have to also know what is your responsibility and what is the photographer's. If you look at the photos and you realize that you're puffy, that's not the photographer's responsibility. We're not responsible for your physical condition. So, but if you're blown out and the light's bad, that's the photographer's responsibility. So you have to know whose responsibility is what.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's very solid advice. My last question for you is something that I come up against a lot, and I don't know if you do, but actors have a very challenging time if they're in a position where they have to pick their own headshot. If they don't have representation, if they're not in a class, if maybe they don't have a set of actor friends, so they end up asking family members, which isn't always ideal. So, do you have any tips for actors that are in that boat?
Well, we I do have advice for a process, and it's like I said before, it's not an easy thing to do, especially when you're looking at yourself. The the first thing we advise is to do a process of elimination. Make a copy, make a folder that's your archive, that's your forever copy. Then make a copy that you're going to work with. Go through and do anything you hate, get rid of. Go through that and narrow it down and down and down and down. And once you get down to a working folder where any of these photos you could live with as your headshots, and try to narrow that down as tightly as possible. You know, ideally, you do have a classmates and kind of thing. First thing I would say is don't go to your mom for advice because she's only going to choose big smiley shots. She's coming from a very different place. Try to, if you when you do ask other people, try to make sure that they're actors, that they're in the business, that they understand this a little bit. I tell people in that position who have really no other resource that if they narrow it down to their top 10 or 12, send them to me and I'll tell them what I think. I'm not going to look at 300 pictures and do that for them. Otherwise, I would be doing nothing else. That would take all my time. But I tell them that I'll let them know what I think. They have to make the final decisions. They're their headshots, but I'll give them my advice. But I think the process of elimination is probably the best way to go. And then, as best as they can, remember that this is about competitive headshots for acting, for character, and not what makes me look the most pretty. I do want to say one other thing. You were talking about checking out photographers and getting a sense for who's right for them. One other thing I want to say is I think that it's very important for actors when they're looking for a photographer to make sure that their type is represented. Not only that they get along with the personality with the photographer, which is very important, but right now it's a fantastic time in entertainment that there's more and more representation of every type, of every gender, of every color, of every size and age. It's great. Just make sure that that photographer has worked with your type because it's very important that you get the best possible representation in your headshot. And that should be on their Instagram, on their website. Make sure you're represented.
So, Rex, for any actor who is interested in a headshot session with you, what is
Yes.
the best way to find you?
Check out my website at rexlott.com, rexlott.com. You can also check out my Instagram, which I update more regularly, and that's at rexlott. I'm also on Facebook, Rexlott Photography.
Awesome. Rex, thank you so much. This was
It's
incredibly
my
helpful.
pleasure. I could talk about headshots all day. Thank you, Mel.
All right, you're welcome.